Hi everyone, you're looking at a cube aquarium I set up for my betta fish recently. It's about 2 months old, and I noticed recently that I have ANUBIAS ROT. I was really happy with this scape. I'm not sure if the video quite does it justice. It looks a little bit washed out. But as you can see, there's a lot of ANUBIAS nana petite as well as just nana. So what is ANUBIAS ROT? I decided to make this video because I couldn't really find any other good videos about it on YouTube. So I spent a lot of time researching the subject, and I'm going to present my findings here. So first off, what does ANUBIAS ROT look like? Well, I first noticed it back here in this, this normal-sized ANUBIAS. And if you look closely at the base, you can see how it's sort of brown. Of course, it wasn't brown at first. The rot first started, I first noticed it when the youngest leaf died and floated to the top of the tank with a little bit of brown left on the end. And I was like, huh, that's kind of weird. This was an ANUBIAS that was perfectly healthy. I actually took it as a cutting from one of my other tanks. So at first I thought, well, maybe I accidentally broke this leaf while I was planting it and I didn't notice. But then the next leaf died and floated to the top. Eventually I realized something was going on. By that point I had these 3 leaves left here, and as you can see I pull them up pretty easily. And if we look at the base here, it's brown and it's mushy if I touch it. This is definitely ANUBIAS rot, also called rhizome rot because it creeps up the rhizome. One of the earliest and most informative sources I found on the subject was from the Bulletin of the Russian ANUBIAS Forum from 2011. The author is an ANUBIAS cultivator and has a lot of experience in the subject. He believes that there are 3 different kinds of disease affecting ANUBIAS plants that cause them to rot. It is unknown what causes these diseases, but it is likely bacteria, fungi, or a combination of the 2. The first kind of disease is what I'll call general rot. This disease causes both the rhizome and the stalk supporting the leaf to become what the author calls glassy, or devoid of green chlorophyll. The tissue then begins to die after 2 to 3 days, turning brown, and soon the whole leaf turns glassy and dies. The rot will continue until the plant dies. Besides discoloration, you might also see a white fuzz or slime form around the area. The disease is usually triggered by some abrupt change in plant conditions, such as transport, overheating, or prolonged spike in ammonia. This disease is contagious and can also affect some Bucephalandra species and even cryptocorynes, even though crypts are only distantly related to ANUBIAS. It's important not to jump the gun, however. It's normal to see cryptocoryne leaves melt after being added to a new aquarium. This general rot, however, may be triggered by this initial melting, but soon spreads to the base of the plant and the roots, killing the plant. The second kind of disease is called rhizome rot in Russia. It is a slower, more malignant disease which develops over a period of weeks to months. Rhizome rot only affects the rhizome of ANUBIAS species, and while contagious between ANUBIAS plants, it does not affect other species like cryptocorynes. The author does not mention if Bucephalandra is affected. The rhizome rot only affects the rhizome and causes the plant to die off of the base upwards. This means that the base will die before the leaves, so if you just notice a few unhealthy looking leaves, it is probably some other issue and not rhizome rot. Here you can see a leaf from my tank. It appears healthy, but it is rotten at the base of the petiole where it connects to the rhizome. If you see this, you probably have rhizome rot. The disease is very infectious, and as it progresses, it will spread to other ANUBIAS in the same tank. It does not have to be preceded by a change in water parameters, though such changes might make the plants more vulnerable to infection. The third kind of disease is called black rash. It is a fungal or viral infection that manifests as lumpy brown or black rashes that appear on the leaf stalks, called petioles, and possibly the rhizome. If it progresses too far, then the plant can die and begin to rot. Now that we know the different kinds of disease that can affect ANUBIAS, the first thought in your mind is probably, how can these diseases be prevented, and how can they be treated if they do occur? Just like humans, it's easiest to catch diseases when in a weakened state. If you've been cold and wet for a long period of time, you are more likely to catch the flu as your immune system is weakened. The same is true for ANUBIAS. If they've been exposed to adverse conditions such as being put in a tank that's still cycling or being shipped to your house/store, it is more likely that they will contract one of the diseases. The diseases can also be spread by adding an infected plant to your aquarium. This is why it's important to check any Anubias that you might order for signs of discoloration, especially the rhizome. If the rhizome has any parts in it that are brown and mushy, or any lumpy brown spots on the petiole, do not put the plant in your tank. Aquarium Co-op has sold thousands of Anubias over the years, and based on their experiences with their suppliers, they believe that Anubias rot is present to some extent in all plant farms. And the only way to truly avoid it is to buy only tissue-grown plants from a laboratory setting. If you notice symptoms of rhizome rot or any of the other Anubias diseases, the most important thing to do is to remove the infected tissue. Remove any heavily infected plants and perform a water change. If only a portion of the rhizome is infected, use sterile scissors to cut off the infected tissue. Be careful, the rot can spread up the center of the rhizome and not be seen on the surface. Quarantine the healthy cutting in the spare tank or in a glass or bucket where it can receive enough light. If the plant appears healthy after 3 weeks, it can be returned to the tank. If the disease continues to spread, you may want to try dosing the tank with antifungal drugs. However, there is debate over if this will have any effect. First off, no one is sure if general rot and rhizome rot are caused by fungi, bacteria, viruses, or something else. Some have even speculated that microscopic nematodes may be the culprit. The Russian bulletin notes that drugs such as copper chloroxide and erythromycin may manage the infection, but may also harm the plants. And if you haven't removed all the infected tissue, the rot will return at a later date after you stop treating. Aquarium Co-op states that they've done, quote, extensive testing with antibiotic and antifungal medicines over the span of weeks and months, but haven't seen any healing. It must also be noted that such medications are often dangerous to fish species and downright deadly to shrimp and snails. If too much of the Anubias in your tank has already been infected, the prognosis for your plants is pretty grim. Try to remove all the infected tissue and do a water change. Quarantine healthy plants, preferably not in a tank with other Anubias, lest you risk further infection. If the disease returns, then you may just have to accept your fate. I've looked at dozens of forum posts about Anubias rot, and in cases where many plants in the tank were already infected, most people lost every single Anubias in the tank. Some even had the rot spread to multiple tanks and wipe out every last Anubias plant that they owned, in what one user called an Anubia-geddon. This user, Aquarium, lost over $300 worth of Anubias. At least 2 people note that their rot also spread to their cryptocoreans and killed them as well. Some people were at least able to save healthy plants before they were infected and move them to different tanks after quarantine. Would it ever be safe to add Anubias back into the once infected aquarium, even months after the infection is gone? Some people have had success, but no one is sure, as no one knows what causes these infections or how long it may persist in the tank. One interesting thing that some have noted is that varieties of Anubias with red petioles and rhizomes, such as Cophifolia, appear to be more resistant to Anubias rot. The author of the Russian bulletin speculates that this is due to the antifungal and antibacterial properties of the red pigment anthocyanin. This may also explain why the closely related Bucephalandra is less likely to develop rot, as most varieties have red pigments. As mentioned at the beginning, I first noticed the rot in the Anubias nana at the back of my tank. The first plant infected was from a cutting of a larger plant in my main tank, which is still healthy. I don't know where the rot came from. Maybe it came out of the substrate, as the base layer in the tank is cheap topsoil that I got from Lowe's. Or maybe it came in on one of the Anubias nana petite that I bought for the tank, even though they didn't show symptoms until later. Here you can see a large brown patch on the rhizome of the Anubias nana petite. This one here has already begun dropping some leaves, starting with the youngest at the end of the rhizome. I'm hoping that I have rhizome rot and not general rot, as I don't want this Cryptocorini lucens or this Bucephalandra to be affected. I'm not going to cut off the healthy portions of Anubias and quarantine them, as I really have nowhere to put them. I'm certainly not going to risk spreading the infection to my 10-gallon tank, which has some Anubias but a lot of really beautiful crypts. Instead, I'm going to continue to observe and document the spread of the disease here in my betta fish tank. I may post update videos about this. Sorry if this video is a downer. You've probably heard that Anubias is one of the most easy plants to keep, and may feel disheartened if your wrist dies, even if you did your best to remove the infected tissues. The important thing to remember is that this is not your fault. Anubias rot is becoming more common, as are other diseases that affect aquarium plants, such as Java fern gall disease. This might be due to a problem with genetics. The more genetically diverse a population is, the more resistance it has to disease. Plant farms make cuttings of Anubias to propagate it. This means that the new plants are genetically identical to their parent plants. The population has no genetic diversity, and thus it has no resistance to disease. If you have had experience with Anubias rot, please share in the comments. Thanks for watching.